This scheme is interesting because it is now a juxtaposition of how we thought about education in the 60s and how we're thinking about education now. The fact that the 1960s buildings are listed gives a certain tenor, a certain aura to this. But what is interesting and what overtook John Pardee and I and fascinated us wasn't the external part of this building, which to some extent is, in terms of architectural language, rather banal. But internally, you begin to realize how rich it was for children's stimulation. The new building that we're putting in is about enclosure. It's about creating a safe place. It's about creating a garden. It's trying to create the idea of space. This is a minimal space now for the number of children that are coming onto this site. And we're trying to create a sort of Arcadia where the landscape and the outside spaces and the inside-outside relationships are key. And this is where our enthusiasm lies.
I think one of the very exciting things about this project is that it will test some of the agendas that the local authority and the government are wishing primary schools to carry in the next few years. It will test the agenda about the use of the school outside of school hours. It will test the agenda about the use of information technology inside a primary school. And I mean, if you compare, for example, this with more than half of the primary schools in Southwark are three-storey Victorian board schools which sit in a sea of tarmac now and are surrounded often by 7 or 8 foot brick walls. This is a very different idea of a primary school. It's a primary school that will be reaching out into the community. It'll have to, because all primary schools will be required to, but this is one of the first of this new set of primary schools that will be designed to do that. And if I just point out, we've got quite a challenging site. Rolls Road is a reasonably busy road. Marlborough Grove, not busy, but it does carry traffic from the nearby, a neighbouring industrial estate. And it's a tough bit of London. I mean, this is not an easy place to build a school that reaches out into the community, but the opportunity to do it, we find very exciting.
But the key part of this is the idea of an enclosure which becomes a very beautiful enclosure, and the linkages that we make between the new 21st century, because this gives a new identity to the school, a new set of elevations, and the linkages to the existing building in these areas are going to be key to how successful we hope we're going to be. The richness for us was the David Med thing. I mean, the fact that it was single story and the kids were grounded because most of them live in tall blocks. So the single story idea was key. But all the David Med buildings were non-directional. They were not exactly objects in the site, but they were creating inside-outside relationships with a very, very nice landscape, which of course in this part of London contributes very richly. What we've provided is buildings that are very directional. They're really part of an enclosure. They all look inwards. That creates an interest and an enthusiasm, but it also creates problems. What they're trying to do is insulate the site from the pollution of the outside world, pollution in terms of noise, pollution in terms of dirt and everything else. So the idea of an enclosure that is inward looking adds to the richness of this. There's also an architectural philosophy here, which we call the twin phenomena. And it really starts with the client brief, where we're starting with inside, outside. We're talking about transparency and opaqueness. We're talking about contrasting opposites. And we're using those contrasting opposites to be part of a very rich architectural philosophy where you have the soft and the hard juxtaposed in such a way that it really adds to the educational environment and the richness for children to live and be stimulated and educated in this. It becomes a sort of social generator, much more than just for small children. But then, of course, one of the problems, because we're also about problem solving, it isn't just about architecture, it's about putting sufficient accommodation on this site and leaving enough space, play space, to achieve what we feel would be a wonderful environment for children to live and play in. The David Med buildings are lightweight buildings and fairly cheap buildings, economic buildings. They're not built in a durable, long-lasting way. That's half our problem. If we're going to achieve cooling during the summer, these are going to be occupied during the summer, then we have to think about how do we cool these buildings and how do we naturally light and ventilate them. And because the amount of solar gain they're going to get is considerable. And to solve those problems, one normally expects heavyweight buildings. And it's getting the balance of this right, because it isn't just about air temperatures, it's about what we call thermal capacity. You know, if you go into a cathedral, it's always cool because of the sheer weight and mass. Putting weight and mass into these new buildings is what we want to achieve. It's whether or not we can afford to achieve with the problems that face us with the substructure, because the substructure is going to be expensive in this part of London. Learning through landscape, and the joy really will be how much of a garden, a special garden, one can create in this part of London. And it's the quality of that garden that's going to be the real aspiration here. It isn't just about buildings, it's about a whole environment.
We have for a long time worked with John Pardee and formed something of a close working relationship. We have complementary skills that mean we can design buildings and put them on site to quite a substantial size. And in a project of the size and complexity of this primary school, that collaboration is going to be very valuable. My role will be to coordinate all the different members of the design team and at the same time to try to coordinate the different members of the client team, and that's a lot of people all in all. And I see the role as not losing the vision in the process. The challenges are about having a design which everybody feels is an answer to their own agenda. There are many agendas and many people, so that's going to be tough. In a project of this size, the design team is quite large. As well as the architect, there are two engineers, the structural engineer and the mechanical and electrical engineer. Now, they're very important because they really are about the environment of the building, maintaining the right environment and achieving those important targets of sustainability that this project must reach. There is a landscape architect, and in this case, more than in almost any other project I know, landscape is vitally important. And of course the cost consultant, whose job it is to maintain the economy of the project. The client group for a school project is always diverse. The local authority are, formally speaking, those who commission the building, but of course it's the school teachers and the children and the Board of Governors and the public who use the building. And getting a coincidence between the design and those who use the building will be the difference between a successful project and not a successful project. The key stages in a construction project are really the milestones set by satisfying each of the significant stakeholders that what we're doing is a successful fulfillment of their own agenda. First, we have to get planning permission. It needs to be a building that the planning authority are happy to have built in Southwark. We need also to obtain building control approval, which means that the building is sound and has all its technical aspects clear before we go anywhere near sending this building out to tender. We then need to prepare detailed tender documents to get a firm price before the building goes on site. I think there are two parts to consultation. One simple part, I think, well, nothing is simple, but perhaps the more ordinary part is where we as a design team learn from the school and the people who use it how that building should be used in the future, and which helps us, really tells us how we should design it. The other side to consultation is the opportunity that a building project gives to be part of a curriculum for the children who are at the school. And the learning opportunities are many. They are, in the narrowest sense, learning about how a building is done. In the widest sense, they are helping everybody to understand that you can change the world around you. For me, this project will be a success if the vision that was there in the competition entry is there when the red tape is cut.